Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Instant Deck Tech. So as you know, Wednesday means it's Wildcard Wednesday here in Instant Deck Tech land, and we have a super spicy, relatively cheap modern deck to look at today. This is Harvest Wave. Recently took Furukawa Kyuki to an undefeated finish in the infamous small Japanese tournament, but congrats to Furukawa on their finish with the deck. A quick reminder before we break it all down: if you enjoy this deck and you want to see it made into videos, take a minute, click the like button, the subscribe button, leave a comment, anything you can do to support your deck, because whichever deck is most popular gets a shot at being made into videos next week. So Harvest Wave is a really different take on a mono green ramp archetype. So it starts out looking kind of like mono green Devotion. It has the very powerful ramp package of Arbor Elf plus enchantments that go on your land. So Arbor Elf, you want to play this first preferably, then on turn 2 you can play Utopia Sprawl or Fertile Ground, and then you can immediately use Arbor Elf to untap whatever land is being enchanted, and that land taps for multiple mana. Kind of build your own Ancient Tomb, except it doesn't cost you life, so build your own soul lands, and then use those soul lands multiple times in a turn thanks to Arbor Elf. So this allows the deck to make a ton of mana really quickly. The mana base in this deck, 20 basic forests, so you have no problem enchanting things with Utopia Sprawl. You're always going to have a target, always going to have things to untap. So explosive ramp from Arbor Elf and enchantments. We even have some more ramp in Sakura Tribe Elder, which just helps us get forests out of our deck. We can play it, chump block with it. When our opponent goes to damage, we can sack the Sakura Tribe Elder, so we kind of get a free block on a Tarmogoyf or something, plus we get a forest out of our deck, and then we have one Garruk Wildspeaker, very strong when it's untapping lands that are enchanted by Utopia Sprawls and Fertile Grounds, because it just allows us to produce a ton of mana in the same turn. You'll also see, as we get to kind of the payoff, Garruk is also very helpful there as well. So the way this deck produces oodles of mana is the combination of not only what we've already talked about with Arbor Elf and stuff, but when we go to combo off, we're using Vernal Bloom and Early Harvest in conjunction with the 20 basic forests that make up our mana base. So Vernal Bloom makes it so whenever a forest is tapped for mana, you produce an extra mana. So forest tap for 2 mana, essentially, with a Vernal Bloom out. If you have 2 Vernal Blooms, it would be 3 mana, 3 Vernal Blooms, 4 mana, so forth. So the idea is we're going to stack up a bunch of Vernal Blooms, as many as possible, and then we cast in Early Harvest, and this almost makes our deck feel sort of like High Tide. Vernal Bloom is kind of a green High Tide that sits out on the battlefield, and then Early Harvest untaps all the basic lands that everybody controls. So this theoretically can help our opponent, but in Modern, most people are playing a ton of non-basic, so it's going to help us way more, and that's not even considering the fact that our lands are tapping for multiple mana, our forests are often enchanted with Utopia Sprawls and stuff, so Early Harvest lets us make a ton of mana, and it lets us make even more mana when we cast it multiple times in the same turn. So ideally, we'll get our Vernal Blooms down, get a bunch of enchantments on our lands, we'll tap all our lands, make a bunch of mana, we'll cast an Early Harvest to untap them all, then we'll use some of the mana we have floating to cast an Eternal Witness, or cast a Green Warden, to get back the Early Harvest, tap all our lands again, untap them all again with Early Harvest. If we have another Eternal Witness, we can even do it again. So this lets us make just an insane amount of mana, 10, 20, 30 mana, all in one turn by kind of comboing off with Early Harvest. Harmonize draws us a bunch of cards, make sure we find the ramp we need, our Early Harvest, our Vernal Blooms, also helps us find our big finisher, which is Genesis Wave. So Genesis Wave is triple green and X, and basically we look at the top X cards of our library, we get to put all permanents on the battlefield. And our deck is very heavily weighted towards permanents. It doesn't hit our Early Harvest, doesn't hit other Genesis Waves, doesn't hit Harmonize. Otherwise, every other thing in our deck is going on the battlefield. So hopefully, when we cast a Genesis Wave, we're going to get some big, powerful finishers. We're going to get Eternal Witness to get back our Genesis Wave if we need to, or an early harvest, so we kind of combo off that way and can do it again. We're also going to hit a bunch of forests, most likely, and those forests are going to tap for tons of mana because we're also going to hit Vernal Bloom, and the end result of this is we are going to eventually, either by naturally casting them or by hitting them with Genesis Wave, get a couple of big Eldrazi. Kozilek's kind of a weird one of the less powerful of the Eldrazi Titans, but it does draw us 4 cards. The real payoff, though, is Spawnsire of Ulamog, and that's what makes this deck so incredibly unique. So Spawnsire is like the least played of the big Eldrazi. 10 mana, only has Annihilator 1, but it has an ability where if you pay 20, and that sounds like a ridiculously large amount of mana, but for this deck, with Genesis Wave, for Eternal Witness, getting back Early Harvest, and Vernal Bloom, we can make so much mana so easily. We just Genesis Wave into a Spawnsire, untap all of our lands with the Early Harvest we got back with an Eternal Witness, pay 20 mana, and from our sideboard comes Emrakul the Aeons Torn and Ulamog the Infinite Gyre, and you'll notice that Spawnsire says you can cast those Eldrazi, so we do get the extra turn trigger with Emrakul the Aeons Torn. We do get to exile a permanent with Ulamog the Infinite Gyre, so we just win the game on the spot, essentially. So we have this finish that not only puts a ton of stuff on the battlefield, but is going to end the game because we get an Emrakul, take an extra turn, attack with all of our Eldrazi, and not leave our opponent's board. Game over, thanks to Spawnsire with Early Harvest and Genesis Wave. As far as the sideboard, get a bunch of removal, Beast Withins, gets about anything, Fire Spout, and remember, we can use our Fertile Ground and Utopia Sprawl to make mana of any color, so even though we're all forests, we can technically Fire Spout with both costs to hit non-flying creatures as well. Nature's Claim for artifacts and enchantments, Secure the Waste, kind of like Fire Spout, takes advantage of those enchantments to make white mana, and we can just make a ton of tokens for blocking or even for attacking. Wormcoil helps against aggro as well, because it has lifelink. Grafdigger's Cage, Trinisphere, and Plowwonder are to disrupt the opponent. Grafdigger's Cage stops a lot of graveyard-based decks. Trinisphere is kind of strange because we are playing Arbor Elf, we are playing Secure Tribe Elder, Utopia Sprawl, Fertile Ground. We do have a decent amount of cheap stuff in our deck, but we can just brute force our way through a Trinisphere because we can make so much mana while our opponent probably can't, and our opponent makes even less mana when we plow under and put lands on top of their decks, which not only puts them down mana, which disrupts them if we have a Trinisphere, but also makes them skip 2 draws because they're going to be drawing those 2 lands for the next 2 turns. Tooth and Nail is our backup plan out of the sideboard. Instead of going on the Genesis Wave plan, we can just use this to find our Spawnsire or Kozilek, or if we bring an Emrakul or Ulamog, or get something like Spawnsire plus Eternal Witness to get back Tooth and Nail to do it again. And that is Harvest Wave for Modern, and that's been our Wildcard Wednesday Instant Deck Tech for this week. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.